everybody, and welcome to Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Kevin George. I'm the rector here at St. Aidan's, and I just wanted to say a word of thanks tonight as we begin to everybody who's helped get this project going. We've had some incredible readers week after week. We have the beautiful music, that you just heard, which is composed, written, and performed by Ian Stevenson. And just the sheer interest that all of you have had in this, in reading, hearing read each night, The Hobbit, the J.R.R. Tolkien classic, on our Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins. My heart is full of gratitude for all of you for your participation. Tonight, we have Rick and Megan and Connor reading for us, chapters 11 and 12. And tonight we get introduced to Smaug. So we'll learn a little bit about the dragon tonight and how the dragon is sitting on his hoarded treasure. And much excitement in tonight's reading. We're going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus after tonight as I take a little bit of a break and a vacation for a couple of 3 weeks. But don't fret. In August, we'll get right back to Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins, and we'll complete the last few chapters of this great book. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's reading of The Hobbit.
Chapter 12. Inside Information. For a long time the dwarves stood in the dark before the door and debated, until at last Thorin spoke. Now is the time for our esteemed Mr. Baggins, who has proved himself a good companion on our long road, and a hobbit full of courage and resource, far exceeding his size, and if I may say so, possessed of good luck far exceeding the usual allowance. Now is the time for him to perform the service for which he was included in our company. Now is the time for him to earn his reward. You are familiar with Thorin's style on important occasions, so I will not give you any more of it, though he went on a good deal longer than this. It certainly was an important occasion, but Bilbo felt impatient. By now he was quite familiar with Thorin too, and he knew what he was driving at. If you mean you think it is my job to go into the secret passage first, O Thorin, Thrain's son, Oakenshield, may your beard grow even longer, he said crossly. Say so at once and have done. I might refuse. I have got you out of 2 messes already, which were hardly in the original bargain, so that I am, I think, already owed some reward. But 3rd time pays for all, as my father used to say, and somehow I don't think I shall refuse. Perhaps I have begun to trust my luck more than I used to in the old days. He meant last spring, before he left his own house, but it seems centuries ago. But anyway, I think I will go and have a peep at once and get it over. Now, who is coming with me? He did not expect a chorus of volunteers, so he was not disappointed. Fili and Kili looked uncomfortable and stood on one leg, but the others made no pretense of offering, except old Balin, the lookout man who was rather fond of the Hobbit. He said he would come inside at least, and perhaps a bit of the way too, ready to call for help if necessary. The most that can be said for the dwarves is this. They intended to pay Bilbo really handsomely for his services. They had brought him to do a nasty job for them, and they did not mind the poor little fellow doing it if he would. But they would all have done their best to get him out of trouble if he got into it, as they did in the case of the trolls at the beginning of their adventures, before they had any particular reason for being grateful to him. There it is. Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk, with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots. Some are not, but are decent enough people like Thorin and company, if you don't expect too much. The stars were coming out behind him in a pale sky, barred with black, when the hobbit crept through the enchanted door and stole into the mountain. It was far easier going than he expected. This was no goblin entrance or rough wood elf's cave. It was a passage made by dwarves at the height of their wealth and skill, straight as a ruler, smooth-floored and smooth-sided, going with a gentle, never-varying slope direct to some distant end in the blackness below. After a while, Balin bade Bilbo good luck and stopped. where he could still see the faint outline of the door, and by a trick of the echoes of the tunnel hear the rustle of the whispering voices of the others just outside. Then the hobbit slipped on his ring, and warned by the echoes to take more than hobbit's care to make no sound, he crept noiselessly down, down, down into the dark. He was trembling with fear, but his little face was set and grim. Already he was a very different hobbit from the one that had run out without a pocket handkerchief from Bag End long ago. He had not had a pocket handkerchief for ages. He loosened his dagger in its sheath, tightened his belt, and went on. "Now you are in for it at last, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself. "You went and put your foot right in it that night of the party, and now you have got to pull it out and pay for it. Dear me, what a fool I was and am," said the least tookish part of him. "I have absolutely no use for dragon-guarded treasures, and the whole lot can stay here forever. If only I could wake up and find this beastly tunnel was my own front hall at home." He did not wake up, of course, but went still on, till all sign of the door behind had faded away. He was altogether alone. Soon he thought it was beginning to feel warm. "Is that a kind of glow I seem to see coming right ahead down there?" he thought. It was. As he went forward, it grew and grew, till there was no doubt about it. It was a red light, steadily getting redder and redder. Also, it was now undoubtedly hot in the tunnel. Wisps of vapor floated up and past him, and he began to sweat. A sound, too, began to throb in his ears, a sort of bubbling like the noise of a large pot galloping on the fire, mixed with a rumble of a gigantic tomcat purring. This grew to the unmistakable gurgling noise of some vast animal snoring in its sleep down there in the red glow in front of him. It was at this point that Bilbo stopped. Going on from there was the bravest thing he ever did. The tremendous thing that happened afterwards were as nothing compared to it. He fought the real battle in the tunnel alone, before he ever saw the vast danger that lay in wait. At any rate, after a short halt, go on he did, and you can picture him coming to the end of the tunnel, an opening of much the same size and shape as the door above. Through it peeps the hobbit's little head. Before him lies the great bottommost cellar or dungeon hall of the ancient dwarves, right at the mountain's root. It is almost dark, so that its vastness can only be dimly guessed. But rising from the near side of the rocky floor, there is a great glow, the glow of Smaug. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon, fast asleep. A thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils and a wisp of smoke, but his fires were low in slumber. Beneath him, under all his limbs and his huge coiled tail, and about him on all sides, stretching away across the unseen floors, lay countless piles of precious things, gold wrought and unwrought, gems and jewels and silver red stained in the ruby light. Smaug lay with wings folded like an immeasurable bat, turned partly on one side so that the hobbit could see his underparts, and his long pale belly crusted with gems and fragments of gold from his long lying on his costly bed. Behind him, where the walls were nearest, could dimly be seen coats of mail, helms and axes, swords and spears hanging, and there in rows stood great jars and vessels filled with a wealth that could not be guessed. To say that Bilbo's breath was taken away is no description at all. There are no words left to express his staggerment, since men changed the language that they learned of elves in the days when all the world was wonderful. Bilbo had heard tell and sing of dragon hoards before, but the splendor, the lust, the glory of such treasure had never yet come home to him. His heart was filled and pierced with enchantment and with the desire of dwarves, and he gazed motionless, almost forgetting the frightful guardian, at the gold beyond price and count. He gazed what for seemed an age, before, drawn almost against his will, he stole from the shadow of the doorway, across the floor to the nearest edge of the mounds of treasure. Above him the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. He grasped a great two-handed cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast one fearful eye upwards. Smog stirred a wing, opened a claw. The rumble of his snoring changed its note. Then Bilbo fled. But the dragon did not wake, not yet, but shifted into another dreams of greed and violence, lying there in his stolen hall while the little hobbit toiled back up the long tunnel. His heart was beating, and a more fevered shaking was in his legs than when he was going down. But still he clutched the cup, and his chief thought was, "I've done it. This will show them." More like a grocer than a burglar, indeed. Well, we'll hear no more of that. Nor did he. Balin was overjoyed to see the hobbit again, and as delighted as he was surprised, he picked Bilbo up and carried him out into the open air. It was midnight, and clouds had covered the stars, but Bilbo lay with his eyes shut, gasping and taking pleasure in the feel of the fresh air again, and hardly noticing the excitement of the dwarves, or how they praised him and patted him on the back, and put themselves and all their families for generations to come at his service. The dwarves were still passing the cup from hand to hand and talking delightedly of the recovery of their treasure, when suddenly a vast rumbling woke in the mountain underneath, as if it was an old volcano that had made up its mind to start eruptions once again. The door behind them was pulled nearly to and blocked from closing with a stone, but up the long tunnel came the dreadful echoes, and far down in the depths of a bellowing and a trampling that made the ground beneath them tremble. Then the dwarfs forgot their joy and their confident boast of a moment before and cowered down in fright. Smog was still to be reckoned with. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him. Dragons may not have much real use for all of their wealth, but they know it to be an ounce as a rule, especially after long possession, and Smog was no exception. He had passed from an uneasy dream, in which a warrior, although altogether insignificant in size, but provided with a bitter sword and great courage, figured most unpleasantly, to a doze, and from a doze to wide waking. There was a breath of strange air in his cave. Could there be a draught from the little hole? He had never felt quite happy about it, thought it was so small, and now he glared at it in suspicion and wondered why he had never blocked it up. Of late he had half fancied he had caught the dim echoes of a knocking sound from far above that came down through it to his lair. He stirred and stretched forth his neck to sniff. Then he missed the cup. Thieves, fire, murder, such a thing that not happened since first he came to the mountains. His rage passes description, the sort of rage that is only seen when rich folk that have more than they can enjoy suddenly lose something that they have long had but have never before used or wanted. His fire belched forth, the hall smoked. He shook the mountain roots. He thrust his head in vain at the little hole, and then coiling his length together, roaring like thunder underground, he sped from his deep lair through its great door, out into the huge passages of the mountain palace and up towards the front gate, to hunt the whole mountain till he had caught the thief and had torn and trampled him was his one thought. He issued from the gate The waters rose in fierce whistling steam, and up he soared, blazing into the air, and settled on the mountain top in a spout of green and scarlet flame. The dwarves heard the awful rumor of his flight, and they crouched against the walls of the grassy terrace, cringing under boulders, hoping somehow to escape the frightful eyes of the hunting dragon. There they would have all been killed, if it had not been for Bilbo once again. "Quick, quick!" he gasped. "The door, the tunnel! It's no good here!" Roused by these words, they were just about to creep inside the tunnel when Bifur gave a cry. "My cousins, Bombur and Bofur! We have forgotten them. They are down in the valley." "They will be slain, and all our ponies too, and all our stories lost," moaned the others. "We have done nothing. We can do nothing." "Nonsense," said Thorin, recovering his dignity. "We cannot leave them. Get inside, Mr. Baggins and Balin, and you too, Fili and Kili. The dragon shan't have all of us. Now, you others, where are the ropes? Be quick." Those were perhaps the worst moments they had been through yet. The horrible sounds of Smaug's anger were echoing in the stony hollows far above. At any moment he might come blazing down or fly whirling round and find them there near the perilous cliff's edge, hauling madly on the ropes. Up came Bofur. Still all was safe. Up came Bombur, puffing and blowing while the ropes creaked, and still all was safe. Up came some tools and bundles of stores, and then danger was upon them. A whirring noise was heard. A red light touched the points of standing rocks. The dragon came. They had barely time to fly back into the tunnel, pulling and dragging in their bundles, when Smaug came hurtling from the north, licking the mountainsides with flame, beating his great wings with a noise like a roaring wind. His hot breath shriveled the grass before the door and drove in through the crack they had left and scorched them as they lay hid. Flickering fires leaped up and black rock shadows danced. Then darkness fell as he passed again. The ponies screamed with terror, burst their ropes, and galloped wildly off. The dragon swooped and turned to pursue them, and was gone. "That'll be the end of our poor beasts," said Thorin. "Nothing can escape Smaug once he sees it. Here we are, and here we shall have to stay, unless anyone fancies tramping the long open miles back to the river with Smaug on the watch." It was not a pleasant thought. They crept further down the tunnel, and there they lay and shivered through it was and there they lay and shivered, though it was warm and stuffy, until dawn came pale through the crack of the door. Every now and again through the night they could hear the roar of the flying dragon grow and then pass and fade as he hunted round and round the mountain sides. He guessed from the ponies and from the traces of the camps he had discovered that men had come up from the river and the lake and had scaled the mountainside from the valley where the ponies had been standing. But the door withstood his searching eye, and the little high-walled bag had kept out his fiercest flames. Long he had hunted in vain, till the dawn chilled his wrath, and he went back to his golden couch to sleep, and to gather new strength. He would not forget or forgive the theft, not if 1,000 years turned him to a smoldering stone, but he could afford to wait. Slow and silent he crept back to his lair and half closed his eyes. When morning came, the terror of the dwarves grew less. They realized that dangers of this kind were inevitable in dealing with such a guardian, and that it was no good giving up their quest yet, nor could they get away just now. As Thorin had pointed out, their ponies were lost or killed, and they would have to wait some time before Smaug relaxed his watch sufficiently for them to dare the long way on foot. Luckily, they had saved enough of their stores to last them still for some time. They debated long on what was to be done, but they could think of no way of getting rid of Smaug. which had always been a weak point in their plans, as Bilbo felt inclined to point out. Then, as is the nature of folk that are thoroughly perplexed, they began to grumble at the hobbit, blaming him for what had at first so pleased them, for bringing away a cup and stirring up Smaug's wrath so soon. "What else do you suppose a burglar is to do?" asked Bilbo angrily. "I was not engaged to kill dragons, that is warriors' work, but to steal treasure. I made the best beginning I could. Did you expect me to trot back with the whole horde of Thor on my back? If there is any grumbling to be done, I think I might have a say. You ought to have brought 500 burglars, not one. I am sure it reflects great credit on your grandfather, but you cannot pretend that you ever made the vast extent of his wealth clear to me. I should want hundreds of years to bring it all up, if I was 50 times as big and Smaug as tame as a rabbit." After that, of course, the dwarfs begged his pardon. "What then do you propose we should do, Mr. Baggins?" asked Thorin politely. "I have no idea at the moment. If you mean about removing the treasure, that obviously depends entirely on some new turn of luck and the getting rid of Smaug. Getting rid of dragons is not at all in my line, but I will do my best to think about it. Personally, I have no hopes at all, and wish I was safe back at home. Never mind that for the moment. What are we to do today? Well, if you really want my advice, I should say we can do nothing but stay where we are. By day we are but, no doubt, creep out safely enough to take the air. Perhaps before long one or two could be chosen to go back to the store by the river and replenish our supplies. But in the meanwhile, everyone ought to be well inside the tunnel by night. Now, I will make you an offer. I have got my ring, and I will creep down this very noon. Then, if ever Smaug ought to be napping, and see what he is up to, perhaps something will turn up. Every worm has his weak spot, and my father used to say, though I am sure it was not from personal experience." Naturally, the dwarves accepted the offer eagerly. Already they had come to respect little Bilbo. Now he had become the real leader in their adventure. He had begun to have ideas and plans of his own. When midday came, he got ready for another journey down into the mountain. He did not like it, of course, but it was not so bad now he knew, more or less, what was in front of him. Had he known more about dragons and their wily ways, he might have been more frightened and less hopeful of catching this one napping. The sun was shining when he started, but it was as dark as night in the tunnel. The light from the door, almost closed, soon faded as he went down. So silent was he going that smoke on a gentle wind could hardly have surpassed it, and he was inclined to feel a bit proud of himself as he drew near the lower door. There was only the faintest glow to be seen. Old Smaug is wary and asleep, he thought. He can't see me, and he won't hear me. Cheer up, Bilbo. He had forgotten, or had never heard about dragons' sense of smell. It is also an awkward fact that they can keep half an eye open, watching while they sleep, if they are suspicious. Smaug certainly looked fast asleep, almost dead, and dark, with scarcely a snore, more than a whiff of unseen steam, when Bilbo peeped once more from the entrance. He was just about to step out to the floor when he caught a sudden, thin and piercing ray of red from under the drooping lid of Smaug's left eye. He was only pretending to sleep. He was watching the tunnel entrance. Hurriedly, Bilbo stepped back and blessed the luck of his ring. Then Smaug spoke. "Well, thief, I smell you, and I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along, help yourself again. There is plenty, and to spare." But Bilbo was not quite so unlearned in dragon lore as all that, and if Smaug hoped to get him to come nearer so easily, he was disappointed. "No, thank you, O Smaug the Tremendous," he replied. "I did not come for presence. I only wished to have a look at you and see if you were truly as great as tales say. I did not believe them. Do you now? Said the dragon, somewhat flattered, even though he did not believe a word of it. Truly songs and tales fall utterly short of the reality. O Smog, the chiefest and greatest of calamities, replied Bilbo. You have nice manners for a thief and a liar, said the dragon. You seem familiar with my name, but I don't seem to remember smelling you before. Who are you, and where do you come from, may I ask? You may indeed. I come from under the hill, and under the hills and over the hills my path led, and through the air. I am he that walks unseen. So I can well believe, said Smog, but that is hardly your usual name. I am the clue finder, the web cutter, the stinging fly. I was chosen for the lucky number. Lovely titles, sneered the dragon, but lucky numbers don't always come off. I am he that buries his friends alive and drowns them and draws them alive again from the water. I came from the end of a bag, but no bag went over me. These don't sound so credible, scoffed Smog. I am the friend of bears and guest of eagles. I am ring winner and luck wearer, and I am barrel rider, went on Bilbo, beginning to be pleased with his riddling. That's better, said Smog, but don't let your imagination run away with you.
This, of course, is the way to talk to dragons, if you don't want to reveal your proper name, which is wise, and don't want to infuriate them by a flat refusal, which is also very wise. And no dragon can resist the fascination of riddling talk and of wasting time trying to understand it. There was a lot here which Smog did not understand at all, though I expect you do, since you know all about Bilbo's adventures to which he was referring. But he thought he understood enough, and he chuckled in his wicked inside. I thought so last night, he smiled to himself. Lake men, some nasty scheme of those miserable tub-trading lake men, or I'm a lizard. I haven't been down that way for an age and an age, but I will soon alter that. Very well, O Barrel Rider, he said aloud. Maybe Barrel was your pony's name, and maybe not, though it was fat enough. You may walk unseen, but you did not walk all the way. Let me tell you, I ate 6 ponies last night, and I shall catch and eat all of the others before long. In return for the excellent meal, I will give you one piece of advice for your good. Don't have more to do with dwarves than you can help. Dwarves? Said Bilbo in pretended surprise. Don't talk to me, said Smog. I know the smell and taste of dwarf. No one better. Don't tell me that I can eat a dwarf-ridden pony and not know it. You'll come to a bad end if you go with such friends, thief Barrel Rider. I don't mind if you go back and tell them so from me. But he did not tell Bilbo that there was one smell he could not make out at all. Hobbit smell. It was quite outside his experience and puzzled him mightily. I suppose you got a fair price for that cup last night, he went on. Come now, did you? Nothing at all? Well, that's just like them. And I suppose they are skulking outside, and your job is to do all the dangerous work and get what you can when I'm not looking. For them? And you will get a fair share? Don't you believe it. If you get off alive, you will be lucky. Bilbo was now beginning to feel really uncomfortable. Whenever Smog's roving eye, seeking for him in the shadows, flashed across him, he trembled, and an unaccountable desire seized hold of him to rush out and reveal himself and tell all the truth to Smog. In fact, he was in grievous danger of coming under the dragon spell. But plucking up courage, he spoke again. You don't know everything, O Smog the Mighty, he said. Not gold alone brought us hither. Ha ha, you admit the us, laughed Smog. Why not say us 14 and be done with it, Mr. Lucky Number? I am pleased to hear that you had other business in these parts besides my gold. In that case, you may, perhaps, not altogether waste your time. I don't know if it has occurred to you that even if you could steal the gold bit by bit, a matter of 100 years or so, you could not get it very far. Not much use on the mountainside? Not much use in the forest. Bless me, had you never thought of the catch? A 14th share, I suppose, or something like it? Those were the terms, eh? But what about delivery? What about cartage? What about armed guards and tolls? And Smaug laughed aloud. He had a wicked and wily heart, and he knew his guesses were not far out, though he suspected that the lake men were at the back of the plans, and that most of the plunder was meant to stop there in the town by the shore that in his young days had been called Esgaroth. You will hardly believe it, but poor Bilbo was really very taken aback. So far, all his thoughts and energies had been concentrated on getting to the mountain and finding the entrance. He had never bothered to wonder how the treasure was to be removed. Certainly never how any part of it that might fall to his share was to be brought back all the way to Bag End Under Hill. Now a nasty suspicion began to grow in his mind. Had the dwarves forgotten this important point too? Or were they laughing in their sleeves at him all the time? That is the effect that dragon talk has on the inexperienced. Bilbo, of course, ought to have been on his guard, but Smaug had rather an overwhelming personality. I tell you, he said, in an effort to remain loyal to his friends and keep his end up, that gold was only an afterthought with us. We came over hill and under hill, by wave and wind, for revenge. Surely, O Smaug, the unassessibly wealthy, you must realize that your success has made you some bitter enemies. Then Smaug really did laugh, a devastating sound which shook Bilbo to the floor, while far up in the tunnel the dwarves huddled together and imagined that the hobbit had come to a sudden and nasty end. Revenge, he snorted, and the light of his eyes lit the hall from floor to ceiling like scarlet lightning. Revenge! The king under the mountain is dead, and where are his kin that dare seek revenge? Girion, Lord of Dale, is dead, and I have eaten his people like a wolf among sheep. And where are his sons' sons that dare approach me? I kill where I wish, and none dare resist. I laid low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Then I was but young and tender. Now I am old and strong, strong, strong. Thief in the shadows, he gloated. My armor is like tenfold shields. My teeth are swords, my claws spears, the shock of my tail a thunderbolt, my wings a hurricane, and my breath death. I have always understood, said Bilbo in a frightened squeak, that dragons were softer underneath, especially in the region of the chest. But doubtless one so fortified has thought of that. The dragon stopped short in his boasting. Your information is antiquated, he snapped. I am armored above and below with iron scales and hard gems. No blade can pierce me. I might have guessed it, said Bilbo. Truly there can nowhere be found the equal of Lord Smaug the Impenetrable. What magnificence to possess a waistcoat of fine diamonds. Yes, it is rare and wonderful indeed, said Smaug, absurdly pleased. He did not know that the hobbit had already caught a glimpse of his peculiar undercovering on his previous visit, and was itching for a closer view for reasons of his own. The dragon rolled over. Look, he said, what do you say to that? Dazzlingly marvelous, perfect, flawless, staggering, exclaimed Bilbo aloud. But what he thought inside was, old fool, why there is a large patch in the hollow of his left breast as bare as a snail out of its shell. After he had seen that, Mr. Baggins' one idea was to get away. Well, I really must not detain your magnificence any longer, he said, or keep you from much-needed rest. Ponies take some catching, I believe, after a long start, and so do burglars, he added as a parting shot, and he darted back and fled up the tunnel. It was an unfortunate remark, for the dragon spouted terrific flames after him, and fast though he sped up the slope, he had not gone nearly far enough to be comfortable before the ghastly head of Smaug was thrust against the opening behind. Luckily, the whole head and jaws could not squeeze in, but the nostrils sent forth fire and vapor to pursue him, and he was nearly overcome and stumbled blindly on in great pain and fear. He had been feeling rather pleased with the cleverness of his conversation with Smaug, but his mistake at the end shook him into better sense. "Never laugh at live dragons, Bilbo, you fool," he said to himself, and it became a favorite saying of his later and passed into a proverb. "You aren't nearly through this adventure yet," he added, and that was pretty true as well. The afternoon was turning into evening when he came out again, and stumbled and fell in a faint on the doorstep. The dwarves revived him and doctored his scorches as well as they could, but it was a long time before the hair on the back of his head and his heels grew properly again. It had all been singed and frizzled right down to the skin. In the meanwhile, his friends did their best to cheer him up, and they were eager for his story, especially wanting to know why the dragon had made such an awful noise and how Bilbo had escaped. But the hobbit was worried and uncomfortable, and they had difficulty in getting anything out of him. On thinking things over, he was now regretting some of the things he had said to the dragon and was not eager to repeat them. The old thrush was sitting on a rock nearby with his head cocked on one side, listening to all that was said. It shows what an ill temper Bilbo was in. He picked up a stone and threw it at the thrush, which merely fluttered aside and came back. "Drat the bird," said Bilbo crossly. "I believe he is listening, and I don't like the look of him." "Leave him alone," said Thorin. "The thrushes are good and friendly. This is a very old bird indeed, and is maybe the last left of the ancient breed that used to live about here, tamed to the hands of my father and grandfather. They were a long-lived and magical race, and this might even be one of those that were alive then, a couple of hundreds of years or more ago. The men of Dale used to have the trick of understanding their language, and used them for messengers to fly to the men of the lake and elsewhere." "Well, he'll have news to take to Lake Town, all right, if that's what he is after," said Bilbo, "though I don't suppose there are any people left there that trouble with thrush language." "Why, what has happened?" cried the dwarves. "Do get on with your tale." So Bilbo told them all he could remember, and he confessed that he had a nasty feeling that the dragon guessed too much from his riddles added to camps and ponies. "I am sure he knows we came from Lake Town and had help from there, and I have a horrible feeling that his next move may be in that direction. I wish to goodness I had never said that about Barrel Rider. It would make even a blind rabbit in these parts think of the lake men. Well, well, it cannot be helped, and it is difficult not to slip in talking to a dragon, or so I have always heard," said Balin, anxious to comfort him. "I think you did very well, if you ask me. You found out one very useful thing at any rate, and got home alive, and that is more than most can say who have had words with the likes of Smaug. It may be a mercy and a blessing yet to know of the bear patch in the old worm's diamond waistcoat." That turned the conversation, and they all began discussing dragon slayings historical, dubious, and mythical, and the various sorts of stabs and jabs and undercuts, and the different arts, devices, and stratagems by which they had been accomplished. The general opinion was that catching a dragon napping was not as easy as it sounded, and the attempt to stick one or prod one asleep was more likely to end in disaster than a bold frontal attack. All the while they talked, the thrush listened, till at last, when the stars began to peep forth, it silently spread its wings and flew away. And all the while they talked, and the shadows lengthened, Bilbo became more and more unhappy, and his foreboding grew. At last he interrupted them. "I am sure we are very unsafe here," he said, "and I don't see the point of sitting here. The dragon has withered all the pleasant green, and anyway the night has come and it is cold. But I feel it in my bones that this place will be attacked again. Smaug knows now how I came down to his hall, and you can trust him to guess where the other end of the tunnel is. He will break all this side of the mountain to bits, if necessary, to stop up our entrance. And if we are smashed with it, the better he will like it." "You are very gloomy, Mr. Baggins," said Thorin. "Why has not Smaug blocked the lower end, then, if he is so eager to keep us out?" "He has not, or we should have heard him." I don't know, because at first he wanted to try and lure me in again, I suppose, and now perhaps because he is waiting till after tonight's hunt, or because he does not want to damage his bedroom if he can help it. But I wish you would not argue. Smaug will be coming out at any minute now, and our only hope is to get well in the tunnel and shut the door." He seemed so much in earnest that the dwarfs at last did as he said, though they delayed shutting the door. It seemed a desperate plan, for no one knew whether or how they could get it open again from the inside, and the thought of being shut in a place from which the only way out led through the dragon's lair was not one they liked. Also, everything seemed quite quiet, both outside and down the tunnel. So for a longish while, they sat inside, not far down from the half-open door, and went on talking. The talk turned to the dragon's wicked words about the dwarves. Bilbo wished he had never heard them, or at least that he could feel quite certain that the dwarves now were absolutely honest when they declared that they had never thought at all about what would happen after the treasure had been won. "We knew it would be a desperate venture," said Thorin, "and we know that still. And I still think that when we have won it will be time enough to think about what to do with it. As for your share, Mr. Baggins, I assure you we are more than grateful, and you shall choose your own 14th, as soon as we have anything to divide. I am sorry if you are worried about transport, and I admit the difficulties are great. The lands have not become less wild with the passing of time, rather the reverse. But we will do whatever we can for you, and take our share of the cost when the time comes. Believe me or not as you like." From that the talk turned to the great hoard itself, and to the things that Thorin and Balin remembered. They wondered if they were still lying there unharmed in the hall below, the spears that were made for the armies of the great king Bladorthin, long since dead. Each had a thrice-forged head, and their shafts were inlaid with cunning gold, but they were never delivered or paid for. Shields made for warriors long dead, the great golden cup of Thror, the two-handed hammered and carven with birds and flowers, whose eyes and petals were of jewels, coats of mail, gilded and silvered and impenetrable, the necklace of Girion, lord of Dale, made of 500 emeralds green as grass, which he gave for the arming of his eldest son in a coat of dwarf-like linked rings, the like of which had never been made before, for it was wrought of pure silver to the power and strength of triple steel. But fairest of all was the great white gem, which the dwarves had found beneath the roots of the mountain, the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone of Thrain. "The Arkenstone, the Arkenstone," murmured Thorin in the dark, half dreaming with his chin upon his knees. It was like a globe with 1,000 facets. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon. But the enchanted desire of the hoard had fallen from Bilbo. All through their talk he was only half listening to them. He sat nearest to the door with one ear cocked for any beginnings of a sound without. His other was alert for echoes beyond the murmurs of the dwarfs, for any whisper of a movement from far below. Darkness grew deeper, and he grew ever more uneasy. "Shut the door," he begged them. "I fear that dragon in my marrow. I like this silence far less than the uproar of last night. Shut the door before it's too late." Something in his voice gave the dwarves an uncomfortable feeling. Slowly Thorin shook off his dreams, and getting up he kicked away the stone that wedged the door. Then they thrust upon it, and it closed with a snap and a clang. No trace of a keyhole was there left on the inside. They were shut in the mountain. And not a moment too soon. They had hardly gone any distance down the tunnel when a blow smote the side of the mountain like the crash of battering rams made of forest oaks and swung by giants. The rock boomed. The walls cracked and stones fell from the roof on their heads. What would have happened if the door had still been open? I don't like to think. They fled further down the tunnel, glad to still be alive, while behind them outside they heard the roar and rumble of Smaug's fury. He was breaking rocks to pieces, smashing wall and cliff with the lashings of his huge tail, till their little lofty camping ground, the scorched grass, the thrush's stone, the snail-covered walls, the narrow ledge, and all disappeared in a jumble of smithereens, and an avalanche of splintered stones fell over the cliff into the valley below. Smaug had left his lair in silent stealth, quietly soared into the air, and then floated heavy and slow in the dark like a monstrous crow, down the wind towards the west of the mountain, in the hopes of catching unawares something or somebody there, and of spying the outlet to the passage which the thief had used. This was the outburst of his wrath when he could find nobody and see nothing, even where he guessed the outlet must actually be. After he had let off his rage in this way, he felt better, and he thought in his heart that he would not be troubled again from that direction. In the meanwhile, he had further vengeance to take. "Barrel rider," he snorted, "your feet came from the waterside, and up the water you came without a doubt. I don't know your smell, but if you are not one of those men of the lake, you had their help. They shall see me and remember who is the real king under the mountain." He rose in fire and went away south towards the running river.
In the meanwhile, the dwarves sat in darkness, and utter silence fell about them. Little they ate, and little they spoke. They could not count the passing of time, and they scarcely dared to move, for the whisper of their voices echoed and rustled in the tunnel. If they dozed, they woke still to darkness, and to silence going unbroken. At last, after days and days of waiting, as it seemed, when they were becoming choked and dazed for want of air, they could bear it no longer. They would almost have welcomed sounds from below of the dragon's return. In the silence they feared some cunning delivery of his, but they could not sit there forever. Thorn spoke. "Let us try the door," he said. "I must feel the wind on my face soon, or die. I think I would rather be smashed by smog in the open than suffocate in here." So several of the dwarves got up and grouped back to where the door had been. But they found that the upper end of the tunnel had been shattered and blocked with broken rock. Neither key nor the magic it had once obeyed would ever open the door again. "We're trapped," they groaned. "This is the end. We shall die here." But somehow, just when the dwarves were most despairing, Bilbo felt a strange lightening of heart, as if a heavy weight had gone from under his waistcoat. Come, he said. "While there's life, there's hope, as my father used to say. In third time pays for all, I'm going down the tunnel once again. I have been that way twice, when I knew there was a dragon at the other end, so I will risk a third visit when I am no longer sure. Anyway, the only way out is down, and I think this time you had better all come with me." In desperation they agreed, and Thorin was the first to go by Bilbo's side. "Now do be careful," whispered the hobbit, "and as quiet as you can be. There may be no smog at the bottom, but there may be. The bottom, but then again there may be. Don't let us take any unnecessary risks." Down they went. The dwarves could not, of course, compare with the hobbit in real stealth, and they made a deal of puffing and shuffling, which echoes magnified alarmingly. But through every now and again Bilbo in fear stopped and listened. Not a sound stirred below near the bottom, as well as he could judge. Bilbo slipped on his ring and went ahead, but he did not need it. The darkness was complete, and they were all invisible, ring or no ring. In fact, so black that the hobbit came to the opening unexpectedly, but his hand on air stumbled forward and rolled headlong into the hall. There he lay, face downwards on the floor, and did not dare to get up, or hardly even to breathe. But nothing moved. There was not a gleam of light. Useless, unless, as it seemed to him, when at last he slowed, raised his head, there was a pale white glint above him. Far off in the gloom, but certainly it was not a spark of dragonfire, though a worm stench was heavy in the place, and the taste of vapor was on his tongue. At length, Mr. Baggins could bear it no longer. Confound you, Smog, you worm. Confound you, Smog, you worm, he squeaked aloud. Stop playing hide and seek. Give me a light, and then eat me, if you can catch me. Faint echoes ran round the unseen hall, but there was no answer. Bilbo got up and found that he did not know in which direction to turn. Now, I wonder what on earth Smog is playing at, he said. There, he is not home today, or tonight, or whenever it is. I do believe if Oin and Gloin have not lost their tinder boxes, perhaps we can make a little light, and have a look around before the luck turns. Light, he cried. Can anyone make light? The dwarves, of course, were very alarmed when Bilbo fell forward down the step with a bump into the hall, and they just stayed huddled just where he had left them at the end of the tunnel. Shh, shh, they hissed when they heard his voice. And though that helped the hobbit to find out where they were, it was some time before he could get anything else out of it. But in the end, when Bilbo actually began to stamp on the floor and screamed out, "Light!" at the top of his shrill voice, Thorin gave way, and Oin and Gloin were sent back to their buttles at the top of the tunnel. After a while, a twinkling gleam showed them returning, Oin with a small pine torch alight in his hand, and Gloin with a bundle of others under his arm. Quickly Bilbo trotted to the door and took the torch, but he could barely not persuade the dwarfs to light the others or to come and join him yet. As Thorin carefully explained, Mr. Baggins was still officially their expert burglar and investigator. If he liked to risk a light, that was his affair. They would wait in the tunnel for his report. So they sat near the door and watched. They saw the little dark shape of the hobbit start across the floor, holding his tiny light aloft. Every now and again, while he was still near enough, they would caught a glint and a twinkle as he stumbled on some golden thing. The light grew smaller as he wandered away into the vast hall. Then it began to rise, dancing in the air. Bilbo was climbing the great mound of treasure. Soon he stood on the top and still went on. Then they saw him halt and stoop for a moment, and they did not know the reason. If it was the Aidan stone, the heart of mountain, so Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description. But indeed there could not be two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world, ever as he climbed. The same white gleam and shone before him, and Thorin drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew a little globe of pattering light. Now, as they came near, it was tinged with a flickering spark of many colors, and the surface reflected and splintered from the wavering light of the torch. At last he looked down upon it, and he caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet cut and fashioned by the dwarves who had dug it from the heart mountain long ago. It took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance, shot with glints of rainbow. Suddenly, Bilbo's arms went towards its drawn by its enchantment. His small hand would not close about it, for it was a large and heavy gem, but he lifted it, shut his eyes, and put it in his deepest pocket. Now I am a burglar indeed, thought he, but I suppose I must tell the dwarves about it. Sometime they did say I could pick and choose my own share, and I think I would choose this if they took all the rest. All the same, he had an uncomfortable feeling that the picking and choosing had not really been meant to include this marvelous gem, and that trouble would yet come of it. Now he went on again down the other side of the great mound he climbed, and the spark of his torch vanished from the sight of the wandering dwarfs. But soon they saw it far away in the distance again. Bilbo was crossing the floor of the hall. He went on until he came to the great doors at the further side, and there a draught of fresh air refreshed him, but it almost puffed out his light. He peeped timidly through and caught a glimpse of the great passage, and on the dim beginnings of the wide stars up into the gloom, and still there was no sight nor sound of smog. He was just going to turn and go back when a black sheep swooped at him and brushed his face. He squeaked and started stumbling backwards and fell. His torch dropped head downwards and went out. Only a bat, I suppose, and hope. He said miserably, "But now what am I to do? Which is east, south, north, or west?" "Thorin, Balin, Oin, Gloin, Flail, Clail," he cried, as loud as he could. It seemed a thin little noise in the wide blackness. "The light's gone out. Someone come and find me and help me." For the moment his courage had failed altogether. Faintly the dwarfs heard his small cries through. The only word they could catch was help. "Now what on earth or under it has happened?" said Thorin. "Certainly not the dragon, or he would not go on squeaking." They waited a moment or two, and still there were no dragon noises. No sound at all, in fact, but Bilbo's distant voice. "Come, one of you, get another light or two," Thorin ordered. "It seems we have got to go and help our burglar." "It is about time to help," said Balin, "and I am quite willing to go. Anyway, I expect it is safe for the moment." Gloin lit several more torches, and then they all crept out one by one and went along the wall as hurriedly as they could. It was not long before they met Bilbo himself coming back towards them. His wits had quickly returned as soon as he saw the twinkle of their lights. "Only a bat, a dropped torch, nothing worse," he said in answer to their question. Though they were much relieved and were inclined to be grumpy at being frightened of nothing, but they would have said if he had told them at the moment about the Arkenstone. "I don't know," the merged, fleeting glimpse of the treasure were inclined to be grumpy. The mere fleeting glimpse of the treasure which they had caught as they went along had rekindled all the fire of their dwarfish hearts, and when the heart of a dwarf, even the most respectable, is weakened by gold and by jewels, he grows suddenly bold, and he may become fierce. The dwarves indeed no longer needed any urging. All were now eager to explore the hall while they had the chance, and were willing to believe that for the present Smog was away from home. Each now gripped a lighted torch, as they gazed first on one side and then on other, they forgot fear and even caution. They spoke aloud and cried out to one another. They lifted old treasures from the mound, from the ceiling, the wall, held them in light, caressing and fingering them. Phil and Kill were most in a merry mood, and finding still hanging many golden harps strung with silver, they took them and struck them. And being magical and also untouched by the dragon, who had small interest in music, they were still in tune. The dark hall was filled with a melody that had long been silent, but most of the dwarfs were more practical. They gathered gems and stuffed their pockets and let what they could not carry fall back through their fingers with a sigh. Thorin was not least among these, but always he searched from side to side for something which he could not find. It was the Arkenstone, but he spoke of it yet to no one. Now the dwarves took down mail and weapons from the walls and armed themselves. Royal indeed did Thorin look, clad in a coat of gold-planted rings, with silver haft-axe and a belt crushed with scarlet stones. "Mr. Baggins," he cried, "here's your first payment of your reward. Cast off your old coat and put on this." With that he put on Bilbo a small coat of mail worth for some young elf prince long ago. It was of silver steel, with the eyes called mithril, elves called mithril, and with it went a belt of pearls and crystals, a light helm of figured leather strengthened beneath with hoops of steel and studded about the brim with white gems set upon the hobbit's head. "I feel magnificent, he thought, but I expect, like rather absurd, how they would laugh on hill at home. Still, I wish there was a looking-glass handy." At the same, Mr. Baggins kept his head more clear of the light bewitchment of the hoard than the dwarves did. Look before the dwarves were tired of examining the treasures, he became wary of it, and sat down on the floor and began to wonder nervously what the end of it all would be. "I wonder give a good many of those precious goblets," he thought, for a drink of something cheering out of one of barren wooden bowls. "Thorin," he cried aloud, "what next? We are armed, but what good has any armor ever been against Smaug the Dreadful? The treasure is not yet won back. We are not looking for gold yet, but for a way of escape, and we must tempt luck too long." "You speak the truth," answered Thorin, recovering his wits. "Let us go, I will guide you. Not in 1,000 years should I forget the ways of this place." Then he hauled the others and gathered together, and holding their torches above their heads, they passed through the gaping doors, not without many a backward glance of longing. Their glittering mail they had covered again with their old cloaks, and with their bright helms, with their tattered hoods, and one by one they walked behind Thorin, a line of little lights in darkness that halted often, listening in fear for once more of any rumor of dragons coming. Though all the old adornments were long mouldered and or destroyed, and through all was befouled and blasted with the coming and going of the monster, Thorin knew every passage and every turn. They climbed long stairs and turned and went down wide echoing ways, and turned again and climbed yet more stairs, and yet more stairs again. These were smooth, cut out of living rock, broad and fair, and up the doors went, and they met no sign of any living thing, only fugitive shadows that fled from the approach, their torches fluttering in the draughts. The steps were not made all the same of hobbit legs, and Bilbo was just feeling that he could go on no longer, when suddenly the roof sprang high, far beyond the reach of their torchlight. A white glimmer could be seen coming through the opening far above, and the air smelt sweeter before them. Light came dimly through great doors that hung twisted on their hinges and half burnt. "This is the great chamber of Thor," said Thorin, "the hall of feasting and of council. Not far off now, in the front gate, they passed through the ruined chamber. Tables were rotting there. Chairs and benches were lying. The overturned, charred and decaying skulls and bones were upon the floor among flagons and bowls. And broken drinking horns and dust as they came through yet more doors and further end. A sound of water fell upon their ears. The gray light grew suddenly more full. "There is the birth of the running river," said Thorin. "From here it hastens to the gate. Let us follow it." Out of the dark opening in the wall of the rock there issued boiling water, and it flowed swirlingly in a narrow channel, carved and made straight and deep by the cunning and ancient hands. Besides it ran a stone-paved road wide enough for merry men and beasts. Swiftly along this they ran, and around wide sweeping turn, and behold, before them stood the broad light of day. In front there arose a tall arch, still showing the fragments of the old cavern work within, worn and splintered and blackened, though it was a misty sunset in its pale light between the arms of the mountain, and beams of gold fell on the pavement and threshold. A whirl of bats, frightened from slumber by their smoking torches, flurried over them. As they sprang forward, their feet slithered on stones, rubbing smooth and slimed by the passing dragon. Now before them the water fell noisily outward and foamed down towards the valley. They flung their pale torches to the ground and stood gazing on with dazzled eyes. They were come to the front gate and were looking out upon Dale. "Well," said Bilbo, "I never expected to be looking out of the door, and I never expected to be so pleased to see the sun again, and to feel the wind on my face. But ow, this wind is cold." It was a bitter easterly breeze, blew with the threat of oncoming winter. It swirled over and round the arms of the mountain and the valley, inside among the rocks. After the long time in the stewing depths of the dragon-haunted caverns, they shivered in the sun. Suddenly Bilbo realized that he was not only tired, but also very hungry indeed. "It seems to be late morning," he said, "and I suppose it is more or less breakfast time, if there's any breakfast to have. But I don't feel that Smaug's front doorstep is the safest place for a meal. Let's get somewhere else before we can sit quiet for a bit." "Quite right," said Balin, "and I think I know which way we should go. He ought to make for the old lookout post at the southwest corner of the mountain." "How far is that?" asked the hobbit. 5 hours' march, I should think." "It will be a rough going. The road from the gate along the left edge of the stream seems all broken up, but look down there, the river leading to steep stairs that climbed up the right bank, and so to a road running towards Ravenhill. There is, or was, a path that left the road and climbed up to the post. A hard climb, too, even if the old steps are still there." "Dear me," grumbled the hobbit, "more walking and more climbing without breakfast. I wonder how many breakfasts and other meals we have missed," said that nastily clockless, timeless pole. As a matter of fact, 2 nights and the day between had gone by, and not altogether without food. Since the dragon smashed the magic door, but Bilbo had quite lost count, and it might have been one night or a week of nights, for all he could tell. Come, come, said Thorin, laughing. The spirits had begun to rise, and he rattled the precious stones in his pockets. Don't call my palace a nasty hole. You wait till it has been cleaned and redecorated. That won't be till Smaug's dead, said Bilbo, glumly. In the meanwhile, where is he? I would give a good breakfast to know. I hope he is not up on the mountain looking down at us. The idea disturbed the dwarves mightily, and they quickly decided that Bilbo and Balin were right. We must move away from here, said Dori. I feel as though if his eyes were on the back of my head. It's a cold, lonesome place, said Bombur. There may be drink, but I see no sign of food. A dragon would always be very hungry in such parts. Come on, cried the others. Let us follow Balin's path. Under the rocky wall to the right, there was no path. So on they trudged among the stones on the left side of the river. The emptiness and desolation soon sobered even Thorin again. The bridge of Balin had spoken of the fallen of they found long fallen, as must its stones were now only boulders in the shallow, noisy stream, but they forded the water without much difficulty and found the ancient steps and climbed the high bank. After going to the short way, they struck the old road and before long came to a deep dell shelter. Among the rocks they rested for a while and had such a good breakfast as they could, chiefly cram and water, if you know what cram is. I can only say that I don't know the recipe, but it is Bithakush keeps good identify. It's supposed to be sustaining and certainly not entertaining, being in fact very uninteresting except as the chewing exercise. It was made by the lake men for long journeys. After that, they went on again, and now the road struck westwards and left the river. In the great shoulder of the south pointing mountain, spur drew even nearer. At length they reached the hill path. It scrambled steeply up, and they plodded slowly one behind the other, till at last, in the late afternoon, they came to the ridge and saw a wintry sun going downwards to the west. Here they found a flat plate without a wall on three sides, but back to the north by a rocky face, in which there was an opening like door. From that door there was a wide view east and south of west, and from that door there was a wide view east and south and west. Here, said Balin, in the old days we used always to keep watchmen, and that door leads to the rock new chamber that was made here as the god room. There were several places like it round the mountain, but they seemed small and need for watching in the days of our prosperity, and the guards were made over comfortable. Perhaps otherwise we might have had longer warning of the coming of the dragon, and things might have been different. Still, here we can now lie, hide, and sheltered for a while, and can see much without being seen. Not much use if we have been seen coming here, said Dori, who had always been looking up towards the mountain's peak, as if he expected to see Smaug perched there like a bird on a steeple. We must take our chance of that, said Thorin. We can go no further today. Here, here, cried Bilbo as he flung himself on the ground. In the hard rock chamber there would be room for 100, and there was a small chamber further in, more removed from the cold outside. It was quiet, deserted, not even wild animals seemed to have used it in all these days of Smaug's dominion. There they lay their burdens, and they threw themselves down at once and slept. But the others sat near the outer door and discussed their plans. In all their talk they came prematurely back to one thing, where was smog. They looked west, and there was nothing, and east there was nothing, and in the south there was no sign of the dragon. But there was a gathering of very many birds at the gaze in wondered, but there were no near understanding it when the first cold stars came out.
They looked west. They looked east. They looked south. They couldn't find smog. I think in Los Angeles, if you look west or east or south or north or anywhere, all you can see is smog. See what I did there? Smog, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, this is my idea of humor. Anyway, I don't know why they didn't look north. Maybe it was north. I don't know. But anyway, they looked, I think the point is they looked everywhere. They couldn't find them. Now, we must wait. 3 Friday nights from now, we'll return to this great book and find out what happens next. We are left hanging right here on the edge of this cliffhanger to see what happens next. Look, we've only got this much. Here you go, sir. I have that much left in the book. So we maybe have another 2 Friday nights when we pick back up again, and I think it's going to be Friday, August the 7th will be our next episode. I want to express our gratitude to Rick, to Megan, and to Connor for your exceptional reading tonight. I want to invite you all to be as faithful in returning on August the 7th as you've been throughout June and July in hearing these beautiful readers, our young people and their parents, bringing us story time every Friday night for Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins. It's been a real joy. And I can't say enough about just how talented all of our young people are, how committed they are, and how exceptional they are at bringing their reading skills to the fore. Because it takes a bit of courage to step out there and read like this for people. And we're just glad that so many of you have done just that. So bless you all. Safe holidays. I know some of you are going to cottages and the like. Be safe. Be careful. Know God's blessing with you. We look forward to your return, and we look forward to getting back to Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins on August the 7th. Don't miss it. We're nearing the end. God bless everyone.